Drama, controversy, and special sessions may best define the 2015 Florida legislature as impassioned lawmakers battled over health care and district lines for congressional and state senate seats. Will that passion carry over to 2016? We'll talk about it tonight with local members of our Northwest Florida legislative delegation. We are live and interactive on radio and on television. From the Phyllis and Mike Johnson studio, Legislative Review dialogue with the delegation is straight ahead.
This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
And a very pleasant good evening, everyone, and happy holidays. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for joining us. In addition to our television broadcast on WSRE TV, we're also being heard on News Radio 1620. Now, typically, the Florida legislature convenes its regular session in March, but this year lawmakers will get an early start to the session, which is set to convene in January of this year, to be exact, January 12th of 2016, I should say. No doubt, healthcare issues will play a starring role again this year, along with economic incentives to make the Sunshine State more competitive with rivals like Texas. Regulation involving the ride-sharing service Uber, raises for state employees, guns on college campuses, and issues surrounding foster care and Alzheimer's disease are all sure to get the attention of legislators. Our forum tonight is designed for you, the constituents of Northwest Florida, to ask your legislators questions about issues that most concern or interest you. You can do so by email or phone. You can email questions@wsre.org, or you can phone it in at 850-484-1223 or toll free at 1-800-239-WSRE. Senator Don Gates from District 1 and Senator Greg Evers could not make it this evening. On our panel tonight, from the Florida House, District 1 Representative Clay Ingram. Representative Ingram chairs the Transportation and Economic Development Subcommittees. From District 4, Representative Matt Gates. Representative Gates is chair of the Finance and Tax Committee. From District 2, Representative Mike Hill. Representative Hill is vice chair of the Civil Justice Subcommittee. District 3's representative is Doug Broxson. Representative Broxson sits on Local and Federal Affairs Committee. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Let me begin by asking why such an early start to the 2016 session?
Jeff, traditionally we have this early start around the time that the census is performed. That allows the census to be done, reappropriation of populations and districts to take place prior to the start of the legislative session. It allows more time for these things to happen. And so it works out well. It allows members more times to be in their district. And so for that reason, in rather election years, the thought was to try this on a regular basis. There's also an argument to be made, as Representative Gates knows, that this might help with revenue projection with the state budget and allow the economists to have a better idea of how much money we'll have as we work on and craft the state budget.
Okay. Well, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the many questions that we have this evening, let me just get each one of you, I'll just kind of go around the table here, get each one of you to kind of give me an idea of what you're thinking about as we head into 2016. And I'll begin with you, Representative Broxson.
Well, I think we're going to have a much more civil debate between the Senate and the House. I think it's pretty well known that the Senate was dealing with their leadership issue for 2017 and 18, and that cast a lot of concerns over both houses. And I believe you'll see that we'll have a much more congenial atmosphere in Tallahassee. And frankly, we're all looking forward to that.
Representative Hill?
I think what we're going to see more of this coming session is more tax cuts. Representative Gates does a fantastic job chairing Finance and Tax Committee. So I think we're going to see, again, broad-based tax cuts. I think we're going to see a reduction in unnecessary rules and regulations. And I think we're going to see those things that leave more money in the pockets of businesses and individuals. That is what is making our state so prosperous right now.
Okay. Representative Gates?
Well, I think that we're going to focus more on enhancing the liberty interests of our citizens. whether that's ensuring that citizens can fully exercise their rights under the Second Amendment and openly carry firearms, a bill I've sponsored, or whether people will be able to have the choice to use ride-sharing companies like Uber or Lyft or others. I think that the more people are making decisions for themselves and government's not making decisions for people, the more that Florida becomes a vibrant place that's inviting to new businesses and innovation. And of course, as Representative Hill said, people enhance their liberty when they get to keep more of their own money in their pocket. And so I expect that at a time when Florida could have a surplus around $1 billion, that instead of keeping that money to grow government, we'll return that money back to the kitchen tables all around Florida.
Representative Ingram?
Thanks, Jeff. Well said by my colleagues. And I think of this session, we have our election and then a session, and here we go into the last session, hopefully, knock on wood, before the next election. But it's sort of a halftime scenario. And so it's the time you look at the scoreboard and see where you are and what you've done previously and what you need to adjust to do things more successfully. And so I think back to when most of us were elected. We've had some folks come on board since then, but the economy was in shambles. Things were rough, and we put all of our focus on creating jobs and creating an environment where the private sector could create jobs. And so we've done a very good job of that, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that labor now. And so I think the key is to keep our foot on the gas and to continue, again, to cut taxes and regulations. It's kind of amazing that we've cut over 3,000 burdensome regulations. Obviously we're not anarchists. We want there to be a consumer-friendly environment, but useless regulations cut out of the way. That's a huge deal, and so we've got to keep our foot on the gas, and I think we'll do that this coming session.
Okay, very good. Again, I want to remind our viewers and those who are listening on News Radio 1620 to feel free to email any questions you might have for our representatives this evening. You can do that by emailing questions@wsre.org, or you can call us at 850. Boy, I got to tell you, 484-1223. You guys have noticed over the years I've had to start bringing these on set here. Anyway, let's talk about something that is very much concerning to those of us in Northwest Florida. And the Pensacola News-Journal had a nice article on it today, and talking about the concerns that are surrounding the money that will be coming in related to the BP oil spill, and how there's the possibility that other parts of the state may very well want some of that cash. How do we protect that for Northwest Florida? I'll begin with you, Representative Broxson.
Well, I think we all have a great concern about that. For the last 5 years, since 2010, when the oil spill occurred, our county and city and state leaders have been dealing with the federal government in trying to create a mechanism to deliver that money back to the impacted area. We've worked for hours, for months, and now at the 11th hour, when the settlement's announced, we discover that much of that money has been shifted back to the coffers of Tallahassee. That's very concerning, because there's no protection in there that guarantees that the 75-25 formula that Senator Gates introduced will be protected during the 15-year payout. So we're going to have to work double time to convince our colleagues over the next 15 years. We won't be there, and unfortunately we're going to be dealing with people that we've never met that will be making these policies, people that will be elected for the next 15 years. But it's a fairness issue. It happened here. It did not happen in Miami or Orlando or Jacksonville, and that money needs to stay in the impacted areas.
And just to add to that, it's what, $1.5 billion over the next 15 years? Are those numbers correct?
It's $100 million. The installment would be $100 million a year directly into our economy to build our job base.
Well, and that's just for the economic incentives that are a result of the state's settlement. So there's two pots of money, Jeff. One pot of money that results from the federal government's lawsuit against the BP defendants, another that results from the state of Florida's lawsuit against the BP defendants. The money that comes as the result of the state of Florida's lawsuit goes to an entity called Triumph Gulf Coast. That entity has 5 people serving on it, all of whom are Northwest Floridians and who are charged to deploy that money directly here in Northwest Florida. Our job is to make sure that in the upcoming appropriations process, in fact, all $300 million that is statutorily supposed to go to Triumph Gulf Coast in fact goes there, and that our colleagues from around the state don't go and change those statutes. Now, it's a different story as it relates to the federal government's money. In every other Gulf Coast state, a system was set up where the state had some role in the disbursement of the funds. In Louisiana, it went through the legislature. In Texas, it went through the governor's office. But our local governments here in Northwest Florida didn't want that money to go through the state. So they went and lobbied Senator Nelson, and he got a provision put into that bill that established this consortium of local governments. And so the money went to them. Well, that consortium included local governments that are not in the Panhandle. And when they figured out that they outnumbered the number of counties that were in the Panhandle, they took a vote and agreed to not send a lion's share of that funds to our community. So part of the deficiency when it comes to the federal government's allocation of funds from their lawsuit results from the fact that there was an aberration in the federal law that treated Florida differently than every other Gulf Coast state that was affected by the oil spill by not including the governor's office or the legislature.
So what can we do as citizens of the Northwest Florida area that was affected?
We have to make the case. As Representative Broxson said, now it's game time. The money is going to start to show up. We have infrastructure needs in this community that we have to address. And by political might or will, we have to make our arguments. And our arguments have to be good. They have to be evidenced in the economic damages that we suffered and the need to diversify our economy. Fortunately, Representative Ingram is the chairman of the Transportation, Tourism, and Economic Development Appropriations Committee. And so, we will largely be looking to him as a leader in our delegation to ensure that those appropriations are made according to the law.
Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, another thing that this is just sort of another facet, and I appreciate the pressure that Representative Gates,
it's
applies,
a vote of
but it's true. Hey, but ensuring again that so many of the funds that have come through so far, whether it's the NRDA funds or those type of things, have gone to environmental restoration. I think there is a segment of the population that would like to continue to take the federal and state lawsuit funds and apply those almost exclusively to to environmental projects under the guise of them in a roundabout way, being good for the economy. But these funds, to me, exclusively need to be spent on economic restoration and putting the economy in a better position. And they need to be transformative. We'll, God forbid, we'll never have an oil spill, and I hope we never have to deal with anything like that again. But these are our funds we'll never have in this windfall manner ever again. And so we need to do something transformative to our economy, as Senator Gates always likes to say, to add another leg to the stool of our economy to bolster the tourism, agriculture, and military nature of our local economy. So I hope we'll take all of that into account.
When you say transformative, what do you see? And any of you jump in on that question.
As companies look at locating here in Northwest Florida, a typical criticism that we have is a lack of a trained and educated workforce. We obviously have people that are trainable, but putting money toward a thoughtful, systemic program that would help us, continue to have a trained workforce that's ready to go at the drop of a hat if someone wants to build, any type of clean manufacturing plant here, or anything. We're open to anything that'll grow our economy and that doesn't do damage. It's just to make sure that we have a workforce that's ready to go to work there. Navy Federal's facing that. We'll have 10,000 jobs here, and they have to have folks that are able to go and do those jobs as that center opens up. So I think that's a worthy cause to look at, and will require funds to do.
Jeff, I agree with Representative Ingram completely. I am honored to be able to sit on the Transportation and Ports subcommittee this year. And we know that the widening of the Panama Canal is going to be huge, where it's going to be bringing a lot of trade from the Far East into our area. Part of that BP money could be used to expand our port, its capabilities, to be able to bring in even more of that traffic. There's a certain spot out in the Gulf of Mexico when you hit this buoy that Pensacola is actually the shortest distance shoreline from that particular buoy. So if we can expand our port to where it can be able to start accepting larger cargo, larger ships, then that could be something that would really add another leg to our economic engine here.
Okay, very well. Well, you knew it would come, and it's from viewer, so here we go. You guys care to take a guess on the question? Expanding Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And of course, the question becomes, how can you continue to deny constituents access to affordable and often life-altering medical care? Largely, this is from the viewer saying this, because of party affiliation. Well, let's talk about it. Where are we with this as we head into 2016?
We're not going to expand Medicaid, Jeff.
We're not going to
We're
expand.
not going to expand Medicaid because it's a bad deal for Floridians. You know, right now, 1 in every 6 Floridians is on Medicaid. And if you look at the states that expanded Medicaid, that fully implemented Obamacare, look at California, where now 1 in every 3 Californians is on their Medicaid product. So that means that they can't raise taxes enough to pay for the provision of those healthcare services to that wide of a segment of their population. So what do? They have to cut reimbursement rates to the providers, the physicians, the hospitals, the chiropractors, the nurses that see people. And then when you cut the rates for the providers, well then fewer providers participate in the program. So nothing is crueler than telling people that they have health care coverage, but then creating a system that is so flawed and disjointed that they actually can't go see somebody to get taken care of. If you want cataract surgery and you're on the Medicaid product in the state of California, you have to wait anywhere between 9 and 12 months. That's outrageous. So the question is not whether or not to expand a system that is broken, that will make Floridians have to pay more and that will ultimately make us less self-sufficient and more reliant on the federal government. The question is, how do we make sure that low-income Floridians who are truly in need can access a system where they really can get the type of life-altering health care that they need? Our approach in the House of Representatives has been to put the consumer more in charge. Right now, people's health care is almost exclusively dependent on their employer. But if we had a healthcare system that was more like auto insurance, where you got to buy the coverage you need at a price you were willing to pay, then people would compete for the Florida market. And of course you have to have high-risk pools. We have that in Florida now. We have a low-income pool. We have charity care requirements. But I think ultimately the way to solve this problem is by having free market solutions that put the consumer in charge rather than ensuring that everybody is somehow linked into a group plan where, probably no one in this delegation needs obstetrics care, but yet our employers are providing it for us. So an a la carte free market system. We passed such a system in the House of Representatives, I guess it was 1.5 years ago now, and unfortunately that wasn't reviewed by the Florida Senate. I believe that in the coming months, as the Senate realizes that the House will not be expanding Medicaid, that we may get a thorough hearing of some of those free market ideas.
Jeff, I agree with Representative Gates 100%. The reason why I was completely against expanding Medicaid, not only for the reasons that Representative Gates said, but also that with that expansion, we could not choose who our population base was going to be with that expansion. That expansion said that anyone who was within 138% of the poverty level and was an able-bodied adult would be eligible for that Medicaid expansion. So the Florida House went back and said, why can't we expand to those who are truly in need? We have people on waiting lists right now who are disabled, who are blind and elderly, who it was originally intended for. Can't we expand it to them first? The response was no. You must expand it to these able-bodied adults. For me, that was a showstopper right there. Representative Gates made the perfect case that what we need is free market solutions that will take care of this in a way. The more we get government out of the healthcare business, the better it's going to function.
We have drawn a line in the sand, and we've said basically we're not going to put this burden on our taxpayers. We're a limited income state, primarily from sales tax. We're stimulating that economy. Last year we had over 100 million people to come here and help us pay those taxes. But we're not going to continue up this ladder of uncontrolled costs that's going to burden down our educational system, our transportation system, all the things that make Florida worth living by spending it on health care. As cruel as that may sound, it'd be more cruel for us to be driving on roads that were so bad, like many states have opted in, that cannot afford any other services or many other services because of this great expense.
Would you like to add something,
No,
Representative Beaver?
From the standpoint of, just for viewers who don't pay attention to the statewide news, I mean, I think several senators who have traditionally been driving the train to expand Medicaid have said they're not going to push the issue this year. So, and I think that's why a lot of people think that this legislative session will be less contentious, because the issue has been taken off the table. Now that could change at any moment, but that's the news of the day as it stands right now.
So it would be safe to say that the four of you feel more optimistic that something will happen in 2016 that will improve the healthcare situation in the state of Florida.
Yeah, we're already doing it. In the House of Representatives, I serve on the Select Committee on healthcare costs, and we're actually looking at ways that we can decentralize the provision of healthcare services. We passed legislation to allow ambulatory surgery centers to be able to see patients for a longer period of time. Previously, that hasn't been allowed because hospitals are a big special interest that don't want that competition, where at half the cost, with half the rate of infection, with lower instances of medical malpractice, you could go into a specific boutique surgery center for what you need. Driving down the cost of care is, in our opinion, a more virtuous cause than simply providing more and more coverage when then the cost is out of control and ultimately someone has to pay the bill.
Okay, very good. We have quite a few questions coming in, and we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. This year, our legislators put House Bill 455 on the legislative schedule early in hopes of finally getting this bill passed. This is a question from a viewer. In 2012, Governor Scott vetoed the predecessor of this bill, and last year, the House of Representatives shut down early before the bill could be voted upon. So we're talking about the alimony-related bill. Do you think that we will be successful in getting this legislation passed this year and finally begin to modernize our alimony laws?
Jeff, I love that your producer automatically shoots the camera at me on alimony questions, because all of my colleagues here are married and I'm the only bachelor of the group.
That's right.
But I can tell you, I really hope my girlfriend's not watching, but if she is, no, I'll say this, Jeff. I think there's a high likelihood this year that something will happen as it relates to alimony reform. I was disappointed in the governor's veto of that bill. Of course, spouses that are in relationships where they've made some sacrifice ought to have the opportunity to be rehabilitated. The challenge in Florida is that we have a permanent alimony system that really, I think, becomes a disincentive to marriage in many circumstances. And so if we can modernize our alimony laws, give courts some guidance as to what would constitute a long-term marriage versus a short-term marriage, we can have a system that's fair to everybody.
Anybody want to add to that? Or?
Jeff, that bill came before my Civil Justice Committee a week or so ago, and so I was able to see it in detail. It is a sensible, reasonable bill. And it passed the committee, by the way, primarily over along party lines, but there were one or two from the other party who also voted for it. And in particular, one thing I like about that bill is that it allows adjustments as life situation changes. Let's say that the person who's paying the alimony is now retired, their income changes, so why should they continue to pay at the level they were when their income was higher? So it's a very reasonable, sensible bill. It passed the committee, and I think we're going to see it at least pass through the House this year.
Okay. And Representative Ingram, Broxson, you're good
I'll
with
thank
that?
the producer for not putting it.
Okay.
My wife will watch.
Okay, so you guys are good with that. Okay, let's move on to another viewer question here, talking about the Syrian refugees. Will there be discussion regarding acceptance of Syrian refugees into Florida? Please explain any process by which this might be done.
Well, I look at this issue a bit in detail, Jeff, because we have right here in Pensacola Catholic Charities, which processes bringing in refugees from foreign nations and resettling them here right in Pensacola. So I asked to meet with them to explain their program and their process, and it was really eye-opening when you look at the entire thing. There are these voluntary agencies primarily made up of, I would say, institutions of faith who have turned this into an industry. It's a business to where they are paid money to resettle these refugees into the United States. A big problem I have with it is that those who are coming here are not chosen by the United States. They're chosen by the UN. The UN chooses who's going to come here, They then send it to the Department of Homeland Security. These volunteer agencies are then paid money to resettle these refugees. When the issue first broke a couple of weeks ago about the Syrian refugees and how the Obama administration wants to really increase that, in times past was 70,000 they were bringing in. They want to up that to 100,000, as much as 200,000. Our delegation took a stand, wrote a letter to Governor Scott and said, Governor Scott, we request that you stop this program from happening in Florida until we can get a better handle on it. And later that same day, Governor Scott did come out and speak and say that he was against that refugee resettlement. What I believe we should do is to look at any nation that harbors, supports, or transports terrorism, that should go on our radar, and we should receive no refugees from there until we have a process in place where we can properly vet them.
And here's what I don't get, Jeff. You know, you hear the Obama administration say, well, we can screen them. Well, I mean, you look at the guy who started ISIS, al-Baghdadi. We had that guy in custody, in a prison run by the United States. And we screened him, determined there was no threat, we let him out, and then he formed ISIS. You look at this woman who was the operative who came into San Bernardino and, you know, led to this terrible massacre of Americans. She was screened under the fiancé visa program. And so, like, this notion that these screenings are somehow foolproof and that when you're letting in, you know, potentially 100,000 people, that they're not going to be a significant swath of jihadists in that group, I think is just totally unrealistic based on what we've seen from the federal government under their own screening processes. That's probably why FBI Director Comey said in sworn testimony, we do not have the tools today to screen this large number of Syrian refugees and keep the homeland safe. This is a no-brainer. I cannot believe that this is an issue that even has generated controversy at a time when we're at war.
Jeff, when I get a call from my constituents, they want to know if these people want to be an American, if they want to say the pledge, sing the national anthem, educate their kids to believe in this country, to go and fight for this country, for the principles we believe in. If the example in Europe, primarily in France, is that they let in thousands at an open border system, and these people, many of them, have refused to become part of the melting pot of a country. That is very concerning to my constituents, and it should be concerning to us also as elected officials, that we have to stand up and say, we want people that want to be part of this great country and do the things that our forefathers have taught us.
It does seem, given what happened in Paris, given what happened in San Bernardino, it almost seems the game has changed. So as legislators, you're obviously concerned about it, but what can we do about it on the state level to better protect ourselves?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Jeff. And I know that an effort was just started in Congress to try to change the federal law to allow states to with teeth, say they won't accept refugees or whatever the case may be. But that's a very good point, is that as things sit, the power of the state to do that is limited.
And in a federalist system, the states are supposed to have a voice. That's why all of us were so pleased when Governor Scott wrote a letter to Speaker Ryan and said, we've got to do something about this. And pretty soon thereafter, I think as a result of a lot of input from states, Speaker Ryan moved legislation through the House to stop this mass influx while we had all these questions about the screening process. One thing we can do, though, is we can make sure that Americans have full access to their Second Amendment rights. Because if the federal government takes in these 100,000 Syrian refugees, I become increasingly skeptical as it relates to the government's ability to protect people, and then we need to make sure that people can protect themselves. That's why this delegation strongly supports the Second Amendment, and it's why I'm introducing legislation to make sure that citizens can fully access those rights.
Well, let's talk about that, because we do have some questions from viewers this evening regarding that, specifically open carry. Let's talk about it. What's going to happen as far as open carry is concerned as we go into the 2016 session?
We're going to pass open carry in Florida, Jeff. I've sponsored legislation to allow Floridians to have the very same rights that are available to Americans in 45 other states. There are only 5 states in this country where open carry is outright prohibited. They are California, New York, Illinois, South Carolina, and Florida. Now, other than South Carolina, that ain't exactly the crowd I want to be joining up with. And if you look at the states that have open carry and the states that don't have open carry, violent crime is like 25% lower in the states that have open carry. There's a 5% lower murder rate. There's a 38% lower aggravated assault rate. And so while there are many things that impact the crime rate, no one can make the argument credibly that open carry increases gun violence. It doesn't. But what it does do is it doesn't soften us as targets. And I don't expect that most people will open carry. We're obviously going to preserve people's private property rights to be able to say you can't open carry in my store or at my theme park or in my Publix. But, I think that when we don't have citizens concerned about the fact that their jacket may, blow open and their firearm may be exposed and they may be arrested for that, then more people will be able to carry their weapon as they see fit. And then that enhances the security interests of the entire community.
Absolutely, Jeff. This is not new to Florida. Florida was open carry in the past, and it didn't create this Wild West scenario where people were going around just shooting them up. I have a daughter, 20 years old, and there are times like now when it gets dark very early. I want her to be able to walk to her vehicle from either a store or when she's at school, and to be able to protect herself, and to have someone who may be thinking about wanting to do something to hesitate, because she very well may be protecting herself with a weapon. Now, I'm pretty sure, as Representative Gates said, we are not going to see, when this passes, we are not going to see people walking around with machine guns strapped to their shoulders and across their back and so forth. But it does protect those who may be carrying a weapon and they bend over and it is exposed, or the wind blows and it's exposed, and now they're not against the law, but they are able to still carry that weapon to protect themselves.
So if you have a concealed carry permit now under this bill, would you be able to then open carry?
That's correct. And as Representative Hill said, the bill would only allow open carry for those who have a concealed carry permit. So you wouldn't be looking at long guns, machine guns. This would be handguns only for permit holders that have, we passed legislation actually recently, Jeff, that limited the ability, actually eliminated the ability of people that had been in mental institutions to be able to access firearms. So we have good gun safety laws, but we can ensure that we fully vindicate the Second Amendment rights of our citizens with this bill.
Now, the other question that comes up regarding firearms is the ability to carry a weapon on college campuses. Again, that's going to be in the legislature. So where does that stand?
Jeff, if you go to Florida State or the University of Florida, you tell me where the campus begins and where it ends. It's a city within a city. It's a city in Tallahassee. And to tell those folks that they do not have the right to protect themselves would not be fair. You've seen activity already this year at Florida State. I think there was a shooting yesterday outside the campus. But we've got to allow students or whoever to have the right to protect themselves. And whether it's on a campus or at a shopping center, people have a right to have protection.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff, if you would, people I think have a preconceived notion of a drunk frat guy with a gun. That's couldn't be further from the truth. I think that there are cases like the Amanda Collins case in Nevada, and then where the scenario is a girl of age that was legally carrying and had a concealed weapons permit, always carried and felt safe because of that. Was raped on campus, and she knew good and well that if she had had her weapon, the rapist, of course, knew that she legally wouldn't have her weapon on her, and she left it in her car. Other cases, a similar case where a girl was raped, that same rapist, she also carried traditionally a concealed weapon. That same rapist raped and killed another girl on campus, and so the common sense would tell you that if the first girl that was raped that always carried her concealed weapon had her weapon, she wouldn't have been raped, and then the other girl would still be alive. And so just to take away someone's basic right to protect themselves because they walk onto a college campus is something serious. And so I hope people understand that it's not the initial notion you sometimes would conceive in your mind, that there's a very serious and very real world effect to be able to protect yourself.
Okay.
Absolutely, Jeff. And to add on with what Representative Ingram was saying, those who are going to be able to do this are those who are 21 years old, already have a concealed weapons permit. So it's not like, as Representative Ingram was saying, it's some frat party and they're shooting bullets up in the air. We have all seen and know that oftentimes where these tragedies happen, these mass shootings, are in gun-free zones. So if someone who is contemplating doing that would know that, no, there are going to be students there who are probably going to be protecting themselves with their Second Amendment rights, that less likely, I think we're going to see a sharp decline in these number of shootings that take place at these gun-free zones.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to another viewer question. If you keep cutting taxes, how can you keep up with our infrastructure, especially transportation?
Well, that's a no-brainer. I mean, the more taxes we've cut, the more revenues the government's brought in. I mean, and that's just supply-side economics at work and what we all believe in and what we ran to office to do. And so, we have more money than we've had in probably ever in the state budget to put toward infrastructure projects. So I reject the notion that tax cuts bring about a loss in revenue.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this year, we're going to have $1 billion surplus. Last year, we cut taxes by $428 million. The year before, $1.2 billion surplus. Year before that, cut taxes by $500 million, the largest recurring tax cut in Florida's history. So we are in an economic sweet spot right now where we're able to achieve greater economic opportunity and more of the ability to care for the vulnerable with needed resources by making sure that we don't just have more taxes and higher taxes, but more taxpayers. More people are choosing to come to Florida. More businesses in Florida are able to expand. New business growth up. New business spending up 28% in Florida. New home construction and that segment of the economy's contribution to revenue up 52% in Florida. The tourism contribution up 58%. So when we have the right tax policies and the right regulatory policies, when we exercise some humility in government and peel back and realize that it's the people of the great state of Florida that really are the economic engine and not the government, that's when we're able to do the things that Representative Ingram mentioned. And by the way, here in the Panhandle, we were able to add, thanks to Representative Ingram's good leadership, over $1 billion in the 5-year transportation work plan to our region. You look at the fact that the Pensacola Bay Bridge is not going to have a toll. That didn't happen by accident. Everyone predicted that would have to be a toll bridge, but it's not, because our delegation worked together to make sure that when the state had more resources, we put them toward infrastructure, and we got our fair share here in the Panhandle.
Okay. Move on to another viewer question. We talked about the BP oil money here, but how will you ensure the Restore money will go towards fixing some environmental problems versus just economic programs?
Well, that's a separate program. I mean, much of that will be handled by DEP, and they have a joint effort through the 5 other states to handle the environmental dollars. So it's one of the pots that none of the local governments will be able to control, neither will the state directly. But there'll be a plan that's being put together now on how to deal with some of the environmental issues that we're having in a 5-state area.
And Jeff, to echo what we said earlier, a lot of the early money that came down through the state, through DEP, was spent exclusively on environmental projects. And so a lot of money's been spent in that arena already to remediate and get the environment to the condition it was in prior to the spill.
And speaking of environmental, I know we have a question here too regarding dispersants and what the status is of the dispersants in the Gulf of Mexico from an environmental standpoint. Do any of you have an opinion or some insight on how the Gulf waters are from that standpoint? No.
But I think that there's more research that's going to have to be done on that question. Look, when the oil spill hit, it wasn't like a hurricane. This wasn't something that we had experience in dealing with, and I think that dispersants were largely used so that the oil that was on the surface of the water could be distributed throughout the water column, and some effort to ensure that it didn't either all end up on our beaches or all end up so concentrated that it had a greater toxicity level. But the dispersants have their own consequences, and I think that ensuring that we have the right resources dedicated to research will allow us to properly ascertain what the next step is to ensure that there's not lasting environmental damage.
Okay. A question from a viewer: why don't you accept the Supreme Court's decision on same-sex marriage and show your support for same-sex marriage? Anyone want to take that?
I'll take that. First of all, it was a decision that I believe was flawed, that it did not follow our Constitution, that one, they had no authority to make that decision. I thought it was the utmost in arrogance that 5 people think that they can define what marriage is, even though it's been defined for millennia and that was set by God himself, that they believed that they could shake their fists in his face and say, we will tell you what marriage is, and not what has worked throughout society. That's one reason why I don't accept it. The second reason I don't accept it is we have our 10th Amendment to the Constitution. Federalism gives the rights to the states and to the people. That decision was made based on just 5 states which were a part of that lawsuit. For the Supreme Court to say it applies to all 50 states was flat out wrong. Florida was not a part of that lawsuit. It does not apply to us, and Florida does not have to abide by it. And as a sovereign state, we can stand up and say, because we have had a constitutional amendment to our Florida Constitution which defined marriage between a man and a woman. It was passed overwhelmingly by our population, like something like 68% back in 2011. So we have already defined it here in our state. We can abide by that. We can stand on that based on the 10th Amendment and how the power does belong to the people, not 5 unelected people up in Washington, D.C.
The Supreme Court, previous to that, had made this a state rights issue. They were going to allow every state legislature to make this according to what was right for them. They usurped our authority to make any decisions on behalf of the people of Florida. And that's fundamentally wrong. And I think many scholars believe that what they did had nothing to do with the Constitution. It had to do with a social trend that they endorsed.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that? If not, we will move on. Let me ask you about medical marijuana, and let's begin with Charlotte's Web. And why is it taking so long to get that into the hands of those who need it?
The reason it's taking so long is that we were not able to look at any other state in the country and merely mirror their cannabis policy. Frankly, Jeff, I don't envy the cannabis policy of any other state. I don't want Florida to be Colorado or California, but at the same time, we can't not modernize to give people medicine that they desperately need. And so this delegation showed tremendous courage on behalf of Northwest Floridians who needed truly medical, non-euphoric cannabis, and we passed legislation that has been challenged in the courts. The legislation has survived, and actually last week the announcement was made that 5 licensed growers were selected. So there are 5 entities who are legally allowed to grow cannabis in the state of Florida today, and they're getting their greenhouses set up now. And I know it's been far too long coming, years as a matter of fact, since we all voted for that legislation. But I'd rather measure twice and cut once than end up in a situation like Colorado.
Okay.
Especially, Jeff, I mean, like, you know, our I guess my and Doug's first year in the legislature, the big issue that we dealt with was this embarrassment that we as a state, Florida, were the pill mill capital of the world, and we were supplying, legal pain medications to people illegally in other states, and it was a huge pipeline to Appalachia and other parts of the country, and so it was difficult to deal with that and find the right way to shut down the pill mills. And so, like Representative Gates said, the last thing we wanted to do was with ill-conceived policy we tried to push through too quickly to end up in a situation where we, created that same problem that we just dealt with successfully. So I'm glad we're there now, but it was well thought out to go about it sensibly.
So those in need will have access relatively soon, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now there's another question regarding marijuana. There is, as I understand it, something to do with the right to try law, which is a bill being introduced to allow terminally ill patients to use full-strength marijuana.
I love that our viewers have such an interest in the bills I filed, Jeff. Yeah, that's another bill that I filed, and I tend to think that if 2 doctors have signed an attestation that someone has less than a year to live, they probably don't need too much assistance from the government when it comes to what choices they're going to make regarding their pain management. I think about members of my own family who, at the bedside in their final moments, there are times when people are so pumped full of opiates and morphine that they don't even get to say goodbye to their loved ones in their final days. And if a cannabis lozenge would provide, and non-smokable, by the way, this bill does not permit the smoking of cannabis in any way, but if there's a way to alleviate pain but still keep people lucid, I think that's responsible. What I also like about this right to try legislation for people with a year left to live is that we don't risk the consequences that Representative Ingram just referenced regarding overprescription and using medicine as just a fiction for recreational use. I mean, if there's a doctor for whom 95% of their cannabis prescriptions end up living 5 or 10 years, it's not going to be hard to figure out who those people are, because we do keep vital statistics rather accurately in the state of Florida. So I believe that we have to continue to modernize our cannabis policy. I think it only makes sense that if someone has less than a year to live, my more libertarian tendencies would say, let's get out of their way and let that be a decision made by the family, by the patient, and by the physician.
We did this last year with people that are in their last days to experiment on things that maybe it would take the FDA years to license. They don't have years.
Right.
They have months. And for us to arbitrarily say that people are not entitled to try to extend their life through something that we have not approved in Florida is really unfair.
Okay. Let me stay with you, Representative Broxson, because there is talk of a new regulatory structure for oil and gas drilling in the state of Florida. And will that bring about fracking, what's called hydraulic fracturing, which is a drilling technique that has been, I guess depending on how you want to look at it, rather successful in many areas around the country. Your thoughts?
Well, fracking is not a real issue in Florida. We drill at almost 12,000 feet, way below any water concerns. That's normally at 2,500. This is the issue that's in Florida is not fracking. It's a effort to shut down any exploration of energy and to move to more the more social acceptable production of energy such as solar and wind driven energy. We're not there yet. We may be there in 10 years, and I hope we are. I hope we can never have to pump another well. But until we do, we're going to have to continue to depend on oil to keep our economy moving. And Florida, Santa Rosa County, has produced 90% of all the oil and gas ever produced in the state. And if you go to Jay today, you'll see that the people there are healthy, and they're happy, and their cows aren't dying, and their children aren't having disease, because we know how to drill on land. We may not know how to drill a mile deep in the Gulf, but we know how to drill on land.
And Jeff, there was legislation introduced during this past session. It actually passed the committee, which will define how fracturing will operate in Florida. And it sets up parameters of what the companies who are doing that would have to follow in terms of divulging what chemicals are involved, to test samples, to keep stringent records, so that when fracking, or should fracking come to Florida, it will have laws in place to make sure that is safe. Now, as you said, we have seen throughout our nation that what fracking has done is has lowered the cost of energy, not only throughout our nation, but around the world. That, not Florida, United States has now become one of the largest producers of oil in the world because of this new technology, this new technique. And we are seeing it visibly at the fuel pump. We are seeing gas now below $2. 8 months ago, no one could have imagined that was going to happen. 2 years ago, when it was $4 a gallon, we would have been euphoric thinking that it was going to be below $2. I, for one, am very pleased that it's that way. And what it's going to do, because of that, energy has become so inexpensive. We're going to see more manufacturing companies and jobs coming back to the United States because the energy is so inexpensive.
Let me stay with energy for a moment, because a viewer has an interesting question here, and I'm going to read the entire question, and part of it's a statement here, but he says, pushed by free market / Tea Party advocates and environmentalists, the viewer says the Georgia legislature recently changed its laws to allow third-party sales of electricity so that residents can lease solar panels on their rooftops, and the solar energy company can sell that power back to the homeowner. Viewer says this model avoids large upfront cost of panels and has driven growth of solar energy across the nation, but these third-party sales of electricity are illegal in Florida and 3 other states. The issue is the subject of a proposed constitutional amendment in Florida. Do you support opening up more of a free marketplace for energy so that residents can choose the best option?
I think something like that could happen here to an extent. I think that a couple of issues. The safety issue of power being pushed back onto the grid is something that has to be addressed. And the other is the fact that the investor-owned utilities and therefore their ratepayers have paid a lot of money to create the energy grid and the infrastructure that delivers infrastructure to homes. And so that has to be accounted for with the sellback of electricity onto the grid is to account for that. The fact that there's a huge expense that goes into creating that infrastructure. And so if that's addressed, you may see something like that. But that's something that question has to be answered before you'll see something like that in Florida.
You know, technology is creating a lot of disruption in a lot of different industries, and one of those industries is the taxi business. And a company called Uber, which is a ride-sharing service and ride-sharing app, has become rather popular across the nation, if not around the world. Representative Gates, now you are sponsoring a measure that would keep local governments from regulating Uber. Where taxis and limos are regulated by local governments. Tell us about it and why. Why the difference between the two?
Well, first of all, I want to liberate any industry from regulation that stifles innovation. And so if the limousine and taxi industry advocates have ideas for deregulation that would give them more of an opportunity to access the market in an exciting and innovative way, I'm all ears. But here's what is going to happen, one way or the other. There's going to be innovation. The shared economy, companies like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, they are thriving. You know, the largest hotel company in the world owns no hotel rooms. You know, the largest cab company in the world doesn't own any cars. And the only question we have to answer is whether or not in the state of Florida we're going to be inviting to that innovative shared economy or whether or not we're going to resist it. One of the things that creates a predatory environment for innovation in a free market system is where you have different and unpredictable rules within a close proximity. You know, if I wanted to Uber my way to this delegation meeting from my home in Fort Walton Beach, I'd go through the jurisdictions of the city of Fort Walton, Okaloosa County, the city of Mary Esther, Santa Rosa County, the city of Gulf Breeze, the city of Pensacola, and Escambia County. And so that car would have to potentially comply with 7 different sets of rules and regulations. One might say you have to have a pink certificate. The other might say you have to have $1 million in insurance. The other $5 million in insurance. So why not in the state of Florida, you know, roll up our sleeves, perform the legislative labor, find out what will keep people safe, what is a reasonable platform for ride sharing to occur, and then apply that so that you don't have different rules and regulations. And I think that, you know, that's one of the things that Representative Hill mentioned in his opening comments. To the extent that a regulatory environment stifles the type of innovative growth that's happening in this country, let's get rid of it and let's make sure that those innovators want to come to the great state of Florida.
No, Jeff, and adding to that, Representative Gates was exactly right. Are those drivers who are providing this Uber and Lyft and so forth, it is stimulating their household income. I was able to sit in on a committee hearing where there were several people from all over the state who came in and testified about how their life has changed dramatically, that they were able to come off of subsistence, they were able to come off of receiving assistance from the government because of what they were earning as an Uber driver. For me, I think that is liberating, not only to our economy, but to families, so that they can then become a part of the American dream. They can start a business, they can work for themselves and provide for their families.
And Jeff, I've got to tell you this. It has nothing to do with a whole lot, but my mom, who can barely work her cell phone, I asked if she needed a ride to dinner earlier this week, and she said, "No, thanks. I'm going to Uber over." Yeah. So it made my week.
It's definitely changing things. There's no question about that. Another question from a viewer. Connecticut governor today issued an executive order to ban assault weapons to those on the no-fly list. Should Governor Scott do the same?
No. He should not do the same, and the reason why he shouldn't do the same is because there are a lot of errors on that no-fly list. That we have examples of elected officials who are on a no-fly list, children who are on a no-fly list. Until that no-fly list can be scrubbed and can be as accurate as it needs to be, we do not need a carte blanche rule or regulation preventing people from their inalienable right to protect themselves because somebody made a mistake and put them on that no-fly list.
And Jeff, I know a concern too is just the fact that it's just an administrative process to put someone on the list. There's no elected oversight. It's just someone can put you on that list, and that's a huge concern that your Second Amendment right can be taken away by someone putting you on that list. because they don't like you.
Okay, about 6 minutes here. A couple of questions we want to get to. Florida has, I believe, about 500,000 citizens who have Alzheimer's disease, an awful lot, needless to say. Will there be more money put toward research? What's the likelihood of this?
Yeah, Jeff, there's, over the past 3 years, Representative Matt Hudson, who chairs the Healthcare Appropriations Committee, created an act named after his grandparents who both suffered from Alzheimer's to put state funds toward Alzheimer's research. Not only research, but also programs to provide respite care for caregivers and things like that, which has been a tremendous relief. But we did put money toward research, and it's gone to institutions all over the state, minus UWF, who actually has a pretty robust Alzheimer's research program here in Pensacola. And so I think we'll try to, a fight we'll have is to try to make sure that some of that money that's been allocated will stay here in this community, because the research here is pretty exciting.
Speaking of the UWF, and Dr. Rodney Gutman out there, who does a terrific job and very, very knowledgeable, that is a wonderful program. Another question, and something else is coming up this year, the Child's Best Hope Act, which would help in reforming foster care and adoption. Would you guys like to comment on that?
Well, we passed adoption legislation last year that really, I think, created the appropriate incentives for people to be able to adopt. I think we ought to have an aspirational goal in Florida where this is the easiest state in the country to consummate an adoption. Everyone here on this dais is pro-life, but when adoptions become more difficult, whether it's a young baby or someone in foster care, I think that you really start to do damage to that culture of life.
Time has absolutely flown by. I only have just a few minutes and about 30 seconds. Let me give each of you an opportunity just to give us a quick close and what you expect for 2016.
Yeah, Jeff, locally especially, some of this is from the state of Florida, some local efforts, but we're in a very good spot considering where we've come from. Graduation rates are up. Unemployment here in Escambia County at 5%. Graduation rates up. Tourism's up. So let's not stop. Let's keep up the effort to improve everything here.
I want to take my 30 seconds to just send my best wishes to Senator Gates. This evening he was out on his back and could not make it. I know that he's probably been yelling at the television, correcting all of the answers that we've given that he might not agree with, or that he would have something to add to. But I love you, Dad. We wish you were here. It's certainly not the same without you.
We certainly missed him. We thought about getting him on the phone, but anyway.
Jeff, I would just like to say that Florida has become the state of choice by many Americans right now. They're moving to Florida, they're starting businesses, they're creating jobs. Since 2010, we have created over 958,000 new jobs. That's more than Illinois and New York combined. Crime is down. It's at a 44-year low. Education is being funded at its highest level. Tourism is up. We're expecting over 1 million visitors by the end of this year. Florida has become the place of destination.
30 seconds.
Panhandle is a great place to live. We have clean water. We have great natural resources. We do need to make sure that we protect the money that's ours from the BP oil spill, and I'm sure this delegation is going to be committed to doing that in 2016, 17, and beyond.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much for spending some time with us, and hope you have a wonderful and happy New Year and a Merry Christmas, and enjoy the holidays. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate our legislators joining us this evening, and it's a very special thanks to you, our viewers and constituents, for your questions. Our guests this evening have been members of the Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation, Representative Clay Ingram, Matt Gaetz, Mike Hill, and Doug Broxson. Senator Gaetz and Senator Evers were unable to join us tonight. Our broadcast has come to you from the Phyllis and Mike Johnson studio over the television airwaves of WSRE TV, PBS for the Gulf Coast, and on News Radio 1620. I'm Jeff Weeks saying thank you so very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Have a happy and safe holiday season. Good night, everyone.